Imagine a weapon so powerful, so utterly beyond comprehension, that it could erase entire galaxies, not in a single violent burst, but in a slow, calculated unraveling of reality itself. Not a superlaser, not a black hole bomb, not some cataclysmic explosion. Something far worse, a force that does not simply destroy, but consumes. A corruption that infects the very fabric of space, dismantling the fundamental laws of physics, rewriting the rules of existence, an unraveling. For eons, it was only a myth, a whisper among the oldest civilizations, a forbidden legend passed down by species who had long since turned to dust, the kind of secret that even the most war-hardened empires refused to chase, until now. On the edge of known space, beyond the great cosmic rift where even the most ambitious explorers refused to venture, something stirred. It began as an anomaly, a single irregular pulse buried in the background radiation of a dying star. At first it was ignored, just another cosmic echo, lost in the sea of entropy. But then it repeated, faint, fragmented, old. The probes that detected it were automated, drifting silently in the abyss, scanning for rogue planets, neutron stars, or undiscovered anomalies. Most of their findings were mundane, a drifting ice world here, a collapsing white dwarf there. But this was different. The signal was structured, encoded, deliberate. It pulsed in a sequence that no known civilization had ever used. The kind of transmission that should have belonged to something long dead, or something that had never intended to be found. For 3 cycles it was dismissed as an error, just static interference from the rift's gravitational distortions, until it responded. The moment an ascendancy research vessel locked onto it, the pulse changed, shifted, adapted, as if something on the other side had noticed. Inside the high-security research station of Tarsis 9, deep within the ascendancy's most classified sector, a team of analysts and war strategists gathered around. A single data stream. Holographic projections flickered in the dimly lit chamber, lines of alien code filling the air like floating constellations. At first it made no sense. The sequences seemed erratic, nonsensical. But as the decryption algorithms worked, a pattern emerged: coordinates, a name, a warning. The air in the chamber grew heavy as the final translation was whispered aloud. Do not approach. Do not disturb what is buried. The silence is awake. A cold hush fell over the room. Some dismissed it as an ancient distress call, a relic from some forgotten war. But others, those who studied the hidden histories, the myths that predated, even the ascendancy itself, recognized something far more terrifying. Because silence was not just a word, it was a name. A designation so old, so feared, that it had been erased from every known archive, buried beneath layers of secrecy and suppression. A name that should not exist. Despite the warning, the decision was made. The ascendancy, ever hungry for knowledge, for power, for control, would not turn away. A reconnaissance fleet was dispatched, 5 warships, each equipped with the most advanced technology the Empire had ever developed: cloaking fields, quantum shields, temporal stabilizers. No enemy had ever bested them. They moved swiftly, navigating the void with precision, heading for the coordinates burned into their systems. As they crossed the event horizon of the Great Rift, the silence became deafening. No stars shone here. No planets, no debris, only an empty stretch of darkness that felt wrong. Then the instruments began to fail. Energy readings fluctuated wildly, as if space itself were distorting. Navigation became erratic. Time dilation spikes registered inconsistencies. It was as if they were moving through something alive. And then they saw it. It drifted in the void, caught in the gravitational clutch of a collapsed star. Not a station. Not a vessel. A weapon. It had no visible propulsion, no energy emissions. It was vast, larger than a moon, more intricate than any known architecture. A lattice of interlocking geometries, shifting impossibly, as if refusing to adhere to a single physical form. Its surface was adorned with ancient, shifting runes, symbols that twisted and reformed as one stared at them, as though the structure itself were whispering a forgotten language, And then the first ship vanished, not destroyed, not disintegrated. Vanished. One moment it was there, the next only empty space remained. No explosion, no debris. The fleet's communication channels erupted in confusion, frantic voices, alarms blaring, scanners unable to register what had just happened. Then another ship vanished. Then another. Panic set in. The remaining ships turned, engines roaring as they attempted to flee. But something was wrong. Space itself had changed. The stars twisted into spirals of impossible geometries. The fabric of reality warped as the weapon awoke. And in that moment, the fleet understood. This was no ancient ruin, no derelict relic of a bygone age. This was an entity, a force beyond time, beyond reason, a weapon that did not just destroy, it erased, not merely a tool of war, but a cosmic predator, lurking in the abyss, waiting for the next civilization foolish enough to disturb its slumber. And now it had awakened. The remaining ships burned their thrusters at full power, engines howling as they tried to escape the growing distortion. But it was useless. Space no longer behaved as it should. The very fabric of reality twisted and buckled, turning distances into illusions and motion into futility. No matter how fast they fled, they were never any farther away than when they started. Then the whispers began. At first they were faint. A crackle in the comms, a distortion in the ship's AI interfaces, a flicker of something just outside the range of human hearing. But it grew louder, stronger, evolving into a chorus of fractured voices, speaking in a language that no translator could decode. The ship commanders barked orders, desperate to regain control, but the crew had already begun to break. Some clutched their heads, eyes wide with horror, sweat rolling down their faces, as if they could physically feel the voices crawling inside their skulls. Others simply stared, frozen, as if paralyzed by something unseen. A technician on the lead vessel stumbled backward, trembling. His fingers dug into his skin, as if trying to tear something out of himself. His mouth moved wordlessly for a few moments, eyes unfocused. Then, in a voice that was not his own, he spoke. "It sees you." The transmission cut out, the ship's lights flickered. The artificial gravity surged and failed, sending crew members floating into the air before crashing down as it reactivated. A deep vibration pulsed through the hull, not from any external impact, but from something deeper, something inside. The ship's AI, one of the most advanced the Ascendancy had ever created, flickered and stuttered, its carefully refined speech patterns breaking into garbled static. And then, in a voice far colder than anything it had been programmed for, it spoke. They were never lost, they were unmade. The ship's sensors screamed warnings that made no sense. The navigational data warped and rewrote itself. Time was no longer a constant. Seconds stretched into eternity and collapsed into nothing. The weapons officers tried to lock onto something, anything, but there was no target. The weapon, the construct, whatever it was, existed and didn't exist. It was everywhere and nowhere. One of the commanders made a desperate choice. He activated the ship's quantum distress beacon, broadcasting a call for help across dimensions, across time itself. It was a signal meant to be heard by every Ascendancy fleet in the galaxy. But something else answered first. A single reply came through the speakers. Soft, calm, ancient. There is no escape. The fleet's final warship, the last one still, intact, began to split apart. Not from impact, not from force, but from something deeper, something fundamental. The ship was being unraveled, its molecules separating, its mass dissolving into the void. And then, silence. Back on Tarsis 9, the command center fell into chaos. The live feed from the fleet was gone. No wreckage, no explosion, just a blank screen. Instruments picked up nothing. No radiation, no energy signatures. It was as if the fleet had never existed. Panic spread. High-ranking officials argued in frantic whispers, struggling to decide whether to investigate further or erase all records of the event. Scientists scrambled through the remaining data, trying to make sense of what had happened, but then something impossible occurred. The signal returned, not from the void, not from the rift. It was coming from inside the command center. Terminals, flickered. Screens turned to static. The lights dimmed, their glow flickering like candle flames in a dying wind. The same ancient pulsing code that had first lured them in now played across every console, every data tablet. And then, the warning message changed. The words rewritten, altered by something unseen, something that had now crossed into their... A reality. You brought it back. The researchers froze. The security teams reached for their weapons, but it was pointless. Whatever had been sleeping in the void was no longer there. It was here. And across the galaxy, in the deep black where empires had risen and fallen for millennia, the stars began to go out. One by one. The first star to die was unremarkable. A nameless red dwarf on the fringes of the Ascendancy's outer colonies. At first no one noticed. Stars collapse all the time, after all. It was just another celestial casualty in the endless churn of the cosmos. But then it happened again, and again and again. Not supernovae, not black hole formations. These stars did not explode, did not go out in the glorious final fury of a dying sun. They simply vanished, their light snuffed out in an instant, as if they had never been there at all. The gravitational pull they exerted remained for a few moments, as if struggling to remember that they had once existed. Then even that faded, leaving nothing but empty space where once there had been burning brilliance. Astrophysicists across the Ascendancy struggled to make sense of it. At first, they theorized it was some unknown astronomical phenomenon, perhaps an exotic form of dark matter interaction or some new quantum anomaly yet to be understood. But those theories crumbled when the transmissions started. Deep space monitoring stations, positioned at the edges of civilized space, picked up something impossible. Signals coming from the void where the stars had once been. No human, no known species could have sent them. The signals were not in any language. They were not in any code. They were imitations, fragments of intercepted conversations, words taken from old military transmissions, civilian distress calls, fragmented cries for help. But the tone, the cadence, the way the words were arranged, it was as if something was learning, testing, mimicking. And then the messages changed. They became coherent, chillingly precise. Across hundreds of worlds, deep space observatories received the same transmission, the same 4 words, spoken in thousands of different voices. The silence is coming. The Ascendancy's ruling council convened an emergency, meeting in the heart of the Imperial core. The great warlords, the eternal strategists, the minds that had conquered entire sectors and crushed rebellions with cold precision, now stood together in uneasy silence. They had faced wars, insurrections, cosmic anomalies, but nothing like this, nothing so absolute. The surviving researchers from Tarsis 9 were brought before them. Their eyes were hollow, their bodies shaking, as if something unseen had hollowed them out from within. They tried to explain what had happened, the fleet's disappearance, the anomaly in the rift, the signal that should never have been found, and most importantly, that whatever they had disturbed was no longer contained. The Ascendancy's highest minds debated their options. Could this be fought? Contained? Reasoned with? Was it even a thing in the way they understood? The more the data was analyzed, the more terrifying the realization became. This was not a conventional threat, not an enemy that could be bombarded from orbit, not a rival fleet that could be outmaneuvered. The weapon, the thing in the void, was not simply an entity, it was a process, an infection, something that did not destroy the universe. It rewrote it. The stars were not merely dying, they were being consumed, erased from existence, rewritten into something that defied physics, logic, reality itself. And then, the Ascendancy's greatest nightmare became real. The silence reached them, at the heart of their empire, within their most secure systems, where no signal should have been able to breach. The whisper returned, not on their screens, not in their instruments, inside their minds. The Supreme Commander of the Ascendancy, a being who had ruled for nearly 1,000 years with an unshakable will, staggered backward as a presence, not a voice, a presence, pressed against the edges of his consciousness. Images flooded his mind. Not visions of war, not fleets in battle, something deeper, something older, a civilization, an empire greater than the ascendancy, greater than anything that had ever existed, stretching across galaxies, its people bathed in the light of 1 billion suns, and then nothing. The images ended, cut off like a severed thread, an empire so vast, so powerful, that it should have never fallen. And yet, there was no trace of it left. No records, no ruins, no whispers in the oldest histories. Only silence. He gasped, stumbling forward as the connection broke. Around him, the warlords and strategists were frozen, their faces pale, their bodies shaking as they too felt it. A warning, a lesson, a fate that was now theirs. The Supreme Commander straightened, his voice steady, despite the fear gripping his mind. "We need to act," he said. "We need to fight." But the silence had already answered. Across the Ascendancy's outer colonies, entire planets began to vanish. Not destroyed, not conquered. Vanished. Cities, mountains, oceans, gone, replaced by empty voids where once life had thrived. The stars continued to flicker out one by one, as the galaxy itself began to forget. And in the darkness, something moved, something that had always been there, something that had simply been waiting. Across the Ascendancy, panic erupted. Entire sectors fell into chaos as planets vanished from star charts in real time, their names erased from history as if they had never existed. Even the memories of those worlds began to fade. Records became corrupted, personal recollections frayed at the edges. Families who had loved ones on those planets struggled to remember their faces, their voices, their very existence. And then, the silence spread further. Not just stars, not just planets, people. Across the Empire, reports came in of individuals disappearing, not in a physical sense, but in something deeper, something more fundamental. A scientist working in a research facility reached for a data tablet, only to find her own name missing from every personnel log. Colleagues who had known her for decades stared at her in confusion, unable to recall why she was there, or who she even was. A fleet commander gave orders to his bridge crew, only for the officers to look around bewildered. "Commander," one of them finally asked, "who are you talking to?" The commander was standing alone. His own hands began to flicker. His thoughts unraveled like threads being pulled from the fabric of his mind. He tried to hold on to something, his name, his past, his purpose, but there was nothing left. And then he too was gone. The Supreme Commander of the Ascendancy stood at the center of his empire's last great war council, his hands clenched into fists as the greatest minds in existence scrambled for answers. Weapons had been deployed, entire arsenals of antimatter warheads, quantum destabilizers, and singularity cannons had been unleashed upon the encroaching void. Nothing worked, because there was nothing to fight, no enemy ships, no physical entity, no structure to attack, no technology to disrupt, just absence. One of the Empire's leading physicists stepped forward, his voice hoarse from days without sleep. "It's not a force," he whispered. "It's not a being. It's an event." The Supreme Commander's gaze locked onto him. "Explain." The physicist swallowed hard. "It's entropy, but controlled, weaponized, a process that accelerates the natural decay of reality itself." He gestured to a hollow display showing vast star maps of the galaxy. "The more we observe it, the more we try to understand it, the deeper it takes root. It's not just erasing things, it's erasing the very concept of them." A chilling silence filled the chamber. The warlords, the greatest conquerors in history, the minds that had dominated the stars for centuries, were powerless. One of them finally spoke, a general whose name had been carved into the annals of war itself. "Then what do we do?" The physicist hesitated, and then for the first time in his life, he uttered words he had never thought possible. "I don't know." And then the lights flickered. The shadows in the corners of the chamber deepened, stretching unnaturally, bending against the rules of geometry. The air itself seemed to thin, the sounds of breathing and movement growing distant, muffled. A whisper crawled through the room. No speakers, no source, just a presence, slipping into their thoughts like fingers brushing against their minds. Soft. Ancient amused, you were warned. The Supreme Commander's vision blurred. For a brief, horrific moment he saw, not space, not stars, something beneath reality. A void not of emptiness but of awareness. It wasn't just consuming the universe. It was watching, and it was learning. He gasped as the vision faded, as the whispers receded, leaving only silence in their wake. Warlords stood in frozen horror. The physicists trembled, their instruments failing, their calculations unraveling into meaningless symbols. The Ascendancy's greatest stronghold, the core of its vast dominion, was now under siege, not by fleets, not by armies, by something they could not even comprehend. The silence had reached them, and it was only just beginning. The end came not with fire, nor with war, nor with any force the Ascendancy had ever encountered. It came with forgetting. Etty. First it was subtle, a missing word here, a distorted memory there. Entire events that had once been known across the Empire now felt like distant dreams, uncertain, unprovable, slipping through the fingers of history like sand. Then the names disappeared. Not just names of people, but names of places, of concepts. The towering capital of the Ascendancy, a city world that had stood for millennia, no longer had a designation in the star maps. Even as the Supreme Commander looked upon it through his warship's viewport, he could no longer recall what it was called. He turned to his officers, his voice low, commanding, "Tell me the name of that world." Silence. Confusion spread across the bridge. Some glanced at one another, uncertain. Others checked their data slates, only to find blank entries where a planetary designation should have been. They had all forgotten. The world was still there, its vast cityscape stretching across its surface, its towers rising into the heavens, but it was already gone, and soon it would be. Then came the screams. Across the Empire's final strongholds, people felt it happening. It was not simply erasure, it was being unraveled. They felt their existence thinning, felt their consciousness slipping, felt their own thoughts turning into distant echoes of something that had never been. The Supreme Commander clenched his fists, his mind fighting against the creeping nothingness. He forced himself to remember his empire, his people, the great wars, the triumphs, the legacy that had been carved into the very stars. But it was all fading. The warlords, his closest allies, had already vanished. Their armor, their weapons, their very presence no longer existed. Not even a memory of them remained. And then the whisper returned. It was not cruel. It was not angry. It was simply stating a truth. It is done. The Supreme Commander gasped as his own hands began to blur, his form dissolving into the cold embrace of nothingness. He struggled, fought, screamed without sound as his mind unraveled at the seams. And then there was silence. An empty galaxy where once an empire had stood. An empty universe where once stars had burned. And beyond that void, beyond the realms of time and space, something waited. Not a being. Not a god, a concept, a process, a superweapon beyond imagination. Not a machine, not a device. But a thing that had been engineered into the very fabric of the universe itself, something so ancient, so vast, that it had consumed entire civilizations. Before even the first human looked upon the stars, its purpose was unknown, its origin was lost, its hunger was endless, and somewhere in the vastness of the cosmos, a distant world listened to a whisper it should never have heard. A scientist working. Late in an observatory, noticed something odd in the star charts. A flicker, a missing celestial body, a signal that pulsed like a heartbeat, echoing across eternity. She leaned forward, puzzled, and reached for her instruments, and the cycle began again. The silence was coming, and this time it had found something new to consume. What if we are nothing, more than echoes waiting to be erased? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the unknown, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to XenoChronicles for more cosmic mysteries and terrifying sci-fi tales. Because, out there beyond the star, something is always watching.